Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video we're going to take a look at how I would approach painting an army of the 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors, for Horus Heresy. But this scheme will work equally well for some Heretic Astartes in 40k, because these guys don't really change very much, which is pretty helpful. Iron Warriors is one of my absolute favourite legions and was one of my first sort of painted 30k projects. I always regret getting rid of them. But the challenge that I really enjoyed with painting them was to try and make them interesting. I think a lot of people just go, oh, it's silver, dry brush it, wash it, you're done kind of thing. There's so much more interest though that we can achieve with just a little bit of thought. Our usual goals with the army painting series, we want an awesome looking army on the table, but we need it to be achievable within a realistic time frame. So each step can really only take 2 or 3 stages at most wherever possible. And it needs to look as good 3 foot away with normal yellow lighting as it does on the screen or on the shelf. Now let's get to it. Sub-assembly is pretty simple. I've primed the model black and I've tacked on the 2 shoulder pads because we're going to paint them differently. The only change I've made with this model, I've drilled out the inside or carved out the inside with my knife and used one of the Forge World Iron Warriors heads to put in there instead. After removing those shoulder pads, the first stage is to spray the whole model a dark silver. Now I've used Vallejo Metal Colour Series Steel here, using it through the airbrush, 25 psi. I'm using the Cult of Paint Infinity by Harder and Steenbeck, which has got a 0.4mm needle and nozzle in there. Any dark silver will do. I've chosen this one because it airbrushes beautifully. A couple of coats gives us a lovely smooth base coat to work from. But you pick whatever metal, whatever silver you like. For our highlight, we're simply going to pick a brighter silver. I'm going to pick a light source, so as we're looking at it there, coming from the right hand side, and I'm going to use Vallejo Model Air Steel. So although it's the same name, it's a different line from Vallejo, it's a completely different colour. This is simply a very bright silver. And again, it airbrushes really nicely. Metallics can be a little bit tricky with a pre-shade, particularly on camera. You're not going to see a huge amount of contrast. You might see a slight change there on the top of the back piece there. But just kind of trust yourself. You can see the paint going on wet, but also if you are struggling, just hold the model out from your painting lamp so it's just in the normal ambient light of the room and you'll be able to see that contrast a little bit better. But it will pay off later on in the scheme. The first way to bring a little bit of interest into this silver, I want to effectively tarnish it. Now I used to use all manner of mixture of inks and varnishes and things to achieve this with. Since I did that original Iron Warriors army and project, the Citadel contrast paints have come out, and there's a ton of great brown paints within that. One of them, Skeleton Horde, is absolutely perfect for this application. So I've just tipped it straight into the airbrush. I've thinned it roughly 50-50 with normal airbrush thinner. Doesn't really matter. You can use water airbrush thinner, whatever. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference. We're just giving this 2 or 3 thin coats, and you can see it just tints that colour. Now once that's dry, I'm going to give the whole model a coat of gloss varnish. I'm using Vallejo polyurethane gloss varnish. Use whatever you like using. But we're using a gloss varnish here because we want to prepare the model for the next couple of stages, which is going to be decal application and an oil wash. To create our oil wash, I've taken a very dark grey oil here. It's called Starship Filth by Abteilung 502. And I'm thinning that down with an odourless mineral spirit, this one by Winsor & Newton called Santador. And we're just working this into a wash consistency. Now in the past I'd have probably just used a black, because all I'm looking for here is definition on the model. We're not really doing weathering, particularly at this stage. But I had recently bought a bunch of new oils, and I really liked this dark grey. I'd used it on a couple of other projects, and I thought it would work well here. So here we are, we're just going to pin wash our way around the whole model. And if you're unsure about that, I'll pop a link up in the corner talking all about recess washing or pin washing and how you can use oils or enamels or acrylics to achieve this really nice step that brings definition, so separation between all the parts of the armour. For the shoulder pads, I couldn't really not do hazard stripes. I'm not a massive fan of loads of hazard stripes all over my Iron Warriors, but I know a lot of people really do like it, so I thought we ought to cover this in this video. I'm just going to base coat them brown. Use any brown you like. I'm using Mornfrang brown here. I know it airbrushes fine. It's quite a nice warm brown colour. And now I'm going to use Tamiya flat white. And whereas I said use any brown you like, I'd really recommend you use Tamiya flat white when you're airbrushing white. It's a beautiful paint to use. I've thinned this about 3 to 4 drops of Tamiya X20A thinner to paint, build up those layers, and just thinking about how the light would hit that curved surface. So it would be brightest where the sort of apex of the curve, and then slightly darker as that curves away from the light. And again, now we're just going to grab any yellow you like. To be honest with you, airbrushing yellow is a doddle, so just pick whatever yellow you like. I'm using here Vallejo Model Air Yellow. I've used it for years. I've never had any problems with it. We just apply a couple of thin coats so that our pre-shade shows through. Always good to let the coats dry before you decide if it needs another one. They'll often dry more opaque than they go on. And just to push the shadows a little further, so add a bit more colour in, I'm going to use Games Workshop Seraphim Sepia, so a sepia wash, just straight through the airbrush, no thinning, just spray that into the shadows. So every opportunity we've got, we're trying to introduce colour into this silver scheme. So whilst the yellow obviously is a very obvious colour, we've used that skeleton horde sort of glaze all over it, and we've used some sepia in the shadows there, so we're trying to bring a bit of warmth into there. Now I'm going to give the model, or the shoulder pads rather, just a couple of coats of the gloss varnish, and this is simply to protect the paintwork, because we're going to mask it off. When you have a glossy surface, gloss varnish is always going to protect your models better than a matte varnish. We're not worried about the finish because we can play around with that later. But because we're going to be using tape, I'd rather not have the paint pull off. And when you're airbrushing paint, it's always more fragile because you're using such thin layers, so it doesn't hurt to protect it in this case. You can see here I'm using very thin strips of paint to create some hazard stripes. And as I'm applying them, I'm using my tweezers to push them down and make sure that they're conforming to all the contours. And I'm using one piece that I'm moving along to make sure I have a uniform gap between all those stripes. Once that's ready, grab your favourite black. Mine's Tamiya flat black if I'm airbrushing. Again, I really like Tamiya paints through the airbrush. We're just going to spray over a couple of coats of this. Now, if I was brush painting the hazard stripes onto a model, depending on the size of the area, so if you were just doing this shoulder pad plate from the Terminator, then I would be doing exactly this process. I'd still be masking it off and I'd be painting it just because it's nice and easy and I'll get nice crisp edges. If it's a smaller area, I'm not going to airbrush it. I'm just going to brush paint it. But again, I would do yellow first, then black. You notice I applied a very, very slight highlight then to the black, just using a grey. That was Tamiya IGN grey, but any grey will do. Now we peel it off. And we've got some nice stripes to work with. If you want to try and put hazard stripes on a power armor shoulder, you can get certain tape that flexes. That blue one I was using, it's quite helpful for that, for going over curved surfaces. And one of the most important things when we're doing stripes, particularly hazard stripes, things like this, is we need to distress the edges between the colours. This is going to bring a lot more realism to the finish, or the effect rather, that we're going for. So all I'm doing is stippling and doing little scratches with some black paint, just breaking up that border between the yellow and the black. It's obviously a lot easier for me to put black paint over the yellow here than it would be for me to get a brush paint yellow and try and bring that over the black. If that effect is something you would rather, potentially using chipping fluid would have been a good idea. So all I've done here is blacked out the details and I've left the oils to dry overnight. You can see we've got a nice little bit of shading. And now to bring that finish nice and uniform across the model, I'm using a satin varnish. Typically I like to use a satin varnish if I'm painting a metallic scheme, because we don't completely kill that shine. For the shoulder pads, I'm going to use a matte varnish. Both these varnishes are the Lucky Varnish range from Ammo by MIG. For the brassy bronze areas of the model, so I've already blacked them out, so I've created a bit of definition. And I'm going to base coat them now using one of my favourite paints, which is Scale 75 Decayed Metal. It's just my favourite because it's like a dark metallic brown. So that's all you're looking for. If you haven't got it, you can't get hold of it, mix a little silver into a brown paint, you'll get a very similar effect. And then I want to give a little bit of sort of corrosion oxidization, whatever, to this brass or this bronze. So I'm going to use a very dark turquoise paint here, and this is GW Contrast Paint Akhelian Green. So I haven't thinned this down or anything, I'm just applying it straight to the model. Once it's dried, I'm going to take a colour called Old Brass by Amma by Mig. Really like this. It is, I believe, designed for airbrushing, so it splits out quite quickly on your palette. So you need to shake it up loads before you use it, and then I'd recommend you use a plastic palette rather than a wet palette because it will separate quite easily. I'm just going to go around, pick out all the rivets and the edges of that brassy bronze colour. I really love the tone, I really love the shine of it. So you can see it's really coming together now. I'm doing all of my metal work first before I move on to the other areas. It's because it's a lot easier if I make some mistakes later to cover it up on a metal part than it would be to get if I got metal on, say, the leather or something like that. It can be a real pain to fix. Little bit of weathering time. So I'm going to take a sponge and a brown, in this case Rhinox Hide, just a nice thick red brown colour. I'm going to start distressing the model. And I always start on the back, because if it goes wrong, it's not so bad. Then just slowly work your way around where you think the majority of the damage is going to occur on the model. I'm touching off the excess. And make sure you do the shoulder pads as well. I mean, these are designed to be, you know, taking a lot of firepower and whatnot, so I suspect they'd be very heavily damaged. And the sponging effect allows us to create a really random collection of little chips across the model. There's some places that the sponge isn't going to reach, or there might be areas where you'd like to create a little bit larger chunks of damage. So you can just go in with your paintbrush, take your brown paint, and just brush a bit in. With all of these Heresy videos, I'm trying to apply a little bit of weathering. Personally, I like a very heavily damaged and weathered model. I'm just trying to apply a little bit in these videos to give you an idea, and you can then go ahead and do as much as you want on it. Because I know some people prefer minimal weathering on their schemes. And now I just take the Vallejo Model Air Steel, so our brighter silver. Just going to go around a couple of the edges where I think some fresh chips might have occurred. This is also going to give us a really nice bright shine. You can see across the model we're starting to get nice elements of contrast, metallics and flats. For all the black parts of the model, I'm just going to give them a quick highlight with Vallejo Model Colour Dark Grey. I base coated them in Vallejo Model Colour Black. So nothing too complicated there. Last part of the model to address is the leather parts. For this I want a nice dull sort of brown leather, so I'm going to base coat it using Rhinox Hide. I want the finish to be dull and matte, but we can still have a bit of warmth in the colour, so Rhinox Hide gives us a nice base to work from, that red brown. Plus we've already used it, so it saves us getting another paint out. I've applied this in a fairly thin base coat. I don't mind if a little bit of the black is showing through. Then I'm going to go over this with scale 75 brown leather. It's basically a lighter version of Rhinox Hide, but it has a very matte finish. So if you've got a similar colour but not this paint, you could always mix a little matte varnish in there and create something very similar. Now I'm going to take Dubai Brown, again by scale 75. This is significantly lighter. I've thinned this a little on my palette, so make sure I haven't got too much on my brush because again the paint's quite dilute, so I want to maintain control. So I take off any of the excess. Now I'll just do tons of little random scratches on either side of those leather panels. We don't need to take ages on this, but little bits of detail, especially on this leather against the metal armour, is really going to help bring some interest into the model. It's also one of my favourite things to paint, but you can see there just the difference it's making, those little scratches, and the key really is just to have a much brighter colour for your scratches. And there we are, been around all those parts of the model. Where we had lost a little definition between the strips, I just mixed Rhinox Hide and black together, and I just painted that in all the recesses. I also painted his eye lens. I was not filming that, it's minute. I put a blob of red in there and a blob of white in there. So the final part that we need to address is the last bit of weathering. For this we're going to use oils again, oil wash, so just like we did earlier we're going to mix an oil paint with some thinners into a wash consistency. In this case I've chosen burnt umber very deliberately. Often I'll just say grab a brown, grab whatever. I've chosen burnt umber again because it has a bit of warmth to it, and I want to get all that colour, all the colour I can into this scheme. So I work my way around everywhere I think grime and dirt's going to accumulate. And as well as the brown, I'm going to grab an orange, so in this case burnt sienna. And we can pull a few little streaks down. Looks particularly nice over the yellow. And a few other spots on the model. Once that's dry, we'll pop him on his base. And there he is, all done. I'm really happy with how this guy came out. I know I often say that, it's been ages since I painted an Iron Warrior and I do have a soft spot for them. And it was nice to revisit a scheme that I did such a long time ago and just tweak it and update it and make it as achievable as possible to get an army of these guys done, like I said, in a realistic time frame. For the base, I'll pop the pigments down that I've used, but it's just our usual technique, and I'll link the video up to that in the corner. We're making really good progress now through all the various Horus Heresy legions, so you can always check those out in the playlist. And if I haven't done a legion that you want me to get to, pop it down in the comments and we'll see if we can get a running order to get the rest of them finished off before this supposed new release of Heresy later in the year. Thanks very much for watching, and if you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button, comment and subscribe if you're not already. It really does help us out. But most importantly, if you've enjoyed it and you've got your mate who's an Iron Warriors player, point them in our direction. And I'll see you next time.